Darlings, good evening. So I got a few requests for sort of cooking related things. I got one from Tumblr user, I'm going to of course butcher your name, Isyadelee, and then also two anonymous questions, one of which was just sort of to see how I cook, and the other one was sort of about if I have a secret ingredient that I like to cook with. So we're just going to cover all of that tonight. We're going to be making something very simple, just spaghetti with sauce. Vegetarian, of course. You can add any meat. So we're just going to dive right into this because of course it's going to take so long and the editing is going to be a bit of a mess. So let's just get right to it. So of course the first thing you want is a nice good pan. You want to start by getting olive oil. We're doing sort of an Italian style sauce, of course, which means you want olive oil, although you can of course use canola or sunflower, sort of those things, although I just prefer, personally, the taste of a good olive oil. So we're just going to have that start to heat up in our pan. You don't have to cover it, I just don't have a lot of space here. So we're going to start off with our onion here, and you want to make sure that you're making nice sort of long strokes. So what I like to do when I cut it, you want to sort of go like this so that you're getting as much sort of, you want these very long, thin pieces. They're going to sort of caramelize a little more easily, and of course they're going to just sort of soften into your mix so that you have it all chopped up and ready to go into the pan. So we have all of this onion to go. As soon as it's ready, you want to make sure that you sort of coat the pan's base entirely in olive oil. So make sure that you give it a nice swirl all around. And I'm also going to put some fresh garlic into it. As far as just chopping the garlic, I just like to do it once down the long way and then into smaller pieces. If you have a garlic mincer, I highly recommend using that instead. It just makes things so much faster. I just don't happen to have one in this country. So we're going to go ahead now and add our onions. So it's going to be sort of a little louder, but the pan lid should help to sort of steam as well as fry everything. And it's just going to give it a little more even cook. You want to have your heat sort of on a medium-low setting because you don't want to burn your onions, you want to caramelize the onions, particularly if you're like me and you just sort of add things as you go, so you haven't yet pre-chopped anything like your garlic or something that would actually be a smart thing to do. But I just sort of, you know, I'm very busy and I don't like to waste dishes by doing all of that. So once you have all of your garlic, you just throw that in there as well. Just give it a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and use cherry tomatoes to be the base tomato for our stock. Roma, of course, are very nice to sort of make into a mix, but they're not available right now in this country. So you just want to make sure that when you do your tomatoes, because you are going to be putting it in with hot oil, that you get as much of the moisture off sort of as possible. So when you're doing it, I suggest if you have a salad spinner or something like that, that you give it a bit of a toss or just a little bit of a rub down with a paper towel. If not, you're definitely going to want to have the lid for your pan, because the second that the water hits that hot oil, it's going to start fizzing and shooting lots of bits of little hot oil at you, which, you know, is not very pleasant. And it also makes just a total mess of little bits of splattering hot oil all over your stove and anything else nearby, including the walls and everything else. So you really want to make sure that you're not sort of getting all that in there together. So we can see now that the onions are starting to sort of get a nice little yellow hue. They're starting to caramelize a little bit. They're not quite there yet. All the tomatoes have to be rinsed and of course dried off before we can add them. Okay, so our tomatoes are all ready to go in, so just grab them by the handfuls. Try to put them low in case there's any moisture left over. It's going to reduce sort of them bumping around and getting all up anywhere that's going to actually cause you any problems. So just sort of put them in a little low, You don't have to have your hand actually in the hot oil, of course, darlings. So just go and do that. And you want to make sure that the tomatoes get fully coated in the oil, because they're actually going to sort of half roast here in this hot pan. Now you can go without the onions and the garlic and just sort of completely roast them in the pan. That's another great way that you can make your sauce as well, and I do it often. Now the second that they're all coated in oil, this is when you want to add your base spices, which for this sauce is going to be salt, pepper, paprika, and a little bit of chili powder. So just a nice little dash of salt in there. Probably about 3 turns of the pepper grinder. I just like a lot of paprika, so I'm just going to go a little crazy here. You'll notice it's starting to get much louder as the spices are hitting that. And then, of course, the same with the chili powder. Then you want to give it a bit of a stir. You want the spices to be well mixed. Okay, and you're going to let the tomatoes sort of soften. They're going to start to swell up and then brown on the outside wherever they're touching the surface, and then they're just going to sort of split open. They're going to burst from the pressure created by the heat inside of them, and that's what you want, because you want that sort of the juice to naturally come out. And then as it sort of burns along the pan, you're going to get more of those rich sort of sweet flavors that you really want out of your sauce. So I'm just going to take a minute because I'm basically out of wine now. But don't use all your wine, darlings, because of course your wine is what you're going to be using in the sauce. It's very important. This is, of course, my secret ingredient is alcohol. It doesn't have to be wine, darlings. In fact, even with the Italian style sauce, you can do it with beer or vodka. Both of them work very well. I sort of would steer more towards beer or wine, but of course you're going to have a more sort of earthy, bitter flavor with the beer than you would with the wine, which is going to be more of a tart or sweet flavor depending on how you spice it. So let's see how we're doing here. So you can see we're sort of starting to get a little bit sort of a wrinkling on the outside of the skin. That's from the ones that are starting to sort of split open now. So we're going to go ahead and chop up now bell pepper. The pepper, what I like to do is sort of do a crosswise. This is sort of a little bit of a trick. Oh dear, I thought this would photograph a little bit better. But what you see is you have these 4 pieces here, which you can just sort of break apart, and look, you have almost nothing, a little bit of white, but you lose most of the seeds as you go, and so I find that that's really the easiest way. You can just shake off any seeds that sort of remain, and what happens is at the end, of course, you're left just with the center piece here that has all of your seeds contained right within. Cut. I like to start again with sort of the longer pieces like that, and then you just sort of go along and you cut like so until you have the smaller pieces. But yes, you want sort of small bite-sized pieces. Again, this pepper is more actually for flavoring than it is for anything else. So you want to make sure that they're small enough pieces. You don't want a big chunk sort of like this, or of course you're not going to be able to sort of have anything workable. So you want to make sure that they're nice and small, little tidbits here. And so that's about the size you're going for. So there's my fingernail, you can sort of see the difference. So yes, you want to go for that. Okay, so once those are all chopped up in nice bite-sized pieces, we're going to go ahead and add them. Want to sort of stir them a little bit too. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the mushroom. The mushroom, I like to do sort of a few lines like this. Make sure everything, oh, this is so difficult with the camera in the way. And then you just sort of go about it like that, and then you have you want them to be sort of similar in size to your bell peppers. So of course you can see they're a little bit bigger, but more or less the same size again as the tip of my finger. So let's get down to it. Okay, we've got the peppers already in, doing their thing. We're doing the mushrooms now. And then the only other vegetable that's going to go into this, of course, is going to be some spinach, because I like to just include as much sort of color and different types of nutrients. As you can see at this point, you're sort of already seeing the liquid sort of coming out. This is only from the tomatoes, this is nothing else. Of course, you can see the softening now here of all of the bell peppers, and of course the caramelized softening of all of our onions. So we're going to go ahead now and just sort of add in our mushrooms at the small size, and once we have that done, we're going to cover and let it sort of soften for a little bit. Now the spinach is going to go in absolutely last. So for now, what we're going to try to do is sort of reduce the liquid in the sauce. Of course, mushrooms also give off a little bit of liquid, not very much. So you have to be sort of careful that you're not getting too much liquid in at this stage in the game. You are going to be adding wine, of course, so you don't really want too much liquid already in your sauce. Now that things are sort of starting, oh, it's so steamy. Okay, so you want to sort of press out your tomatoes. You want to get as much of the juice out as possible, because this is, of course, going to be the base of your sauce. We are going to also be using a little bit of tomato puree or tomato paste. It's up to you which you prefer. It's very expensive in Japan to get the tomato pastes. So we're actually going to be using in this recipe the tomato puree. There's a couple of tomatoes still that haven't burst yet. You can tell because they're of course whole, but they are getting... Alright, so now we're just about ready to add the spinach, which means that you want to start getting your pasta, whichever pasta you're using, whether it's spaghetti or rotini, farfalle, whatever it is you're going to use, you should go ahead and start that. So I have here a pot full of water. It's been salted. You should add at least a couple tablespoons of salt. It sort of makes a bit of flavor, and it supposedly helps it to cook a little faster, although I've heard some conflicting ideas about that. But it does help with the flavor of the pasta. So I'm going to go ahead now and pre-chop the spinach, just because it's so much easier, darlings, than having to wait until it's time to throw it into our pot. So I'm just going to go ahead and give this a little chop. So it's sort of shredding the spinach here. Okay, so it should be nice and fine. It should look sort of like this. And of course, that's all going to wilt down from the heat. You're going to add that actually after your sauce is done, so that you don't completely lose all of the nutrients that are in the spinach. So at this point, you can sort of see it's starting to burn a little bit around the sides, and that's fine, darlings. We want it to sort of cook on. Of course, all the liquid that you use is going to bring up all of that, and that's, of course, that carbonation is going to give you a nice sort of sweetness to it. So now that we're at this point, we're going to go ahead and add two things. We're going to add in our tomato puree, or if you're doing tomato paste, and of course I'll add a little bit of the tomato puree in here, and we're going to go ahead also and add just a little bit of wine. Sorry, I'm doing the puree, but if you're doing the tomato paste, even more so, you're going to want some liquid to sort of help it along. Okay, so we're going to add a little more of the puree in here. Actually, we're just going to add all of it, because you know I'm trying to cook it a little bit ahead of time, so I have something for later in the week. And then one of my favorite tricks for any of these sort of cans, or even if you're using a pre-made sauce and then you're sort of going to just add real vegetables to it, just take a little bit of your wine, put it in your container. I love this. This is so good, especially if you're on a budget. You just shake it up. It gets all of the extra stuff that you can't really scrape out, or it would take so long. And if you look, there's almost nothing left there. You pour it straight in, And your container is almost completely clean now. So it helps with the cleaning, and it's just such a more effective use of what you have. So let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like in the pan. This is sort of what it looks like with the wine and the puree already together. You can sort of hear that things are really starting to come together now. And the color is starting to look good, which means we are just about ready. After this goes about 30 more seconds so that everything's heated up to the same temperature, we're going to go ahead and start seasoning the tomato sauce, and then when that's done, as we set it down to sort of simmer a little bit, that's when we're going to go ahead and add our spinach. You want to reduce now your heat, and you can probably hear that the water is now boiling here for the pasta. So whichever pasta you're using, and again I'm going to be using spaghetti. So we have our spaghetti here, and we're going to go ahead and add that now. Of course, homemade spaghetti always tastes better, but if you don't have a pasta maker, it's such a pain to do, and I don't recommend trying to do it by hand. I tried it once and it was an absolute nightmare, darling, so don't even bother. Now, there's two ways you can do this. Of course, you can break your spaghetti in half so it fits a lot more easily, but I have a dinner guest tonight who's a little picky about the length of their pasta. So, for their sake, I'm going to go ahead and just put it in full size. And I'm going to do a lot, darlings, because, of course, you know, these mortals eat. I mean, these people just tend to eat much more than you expect. So let's just put all of it in. You know, they just eat so. The sauce is really sort of reduced down now. Of course, all of our vegetables are still there in perfect condition, looking absolutely wonderful. And this is where we're going to start spicing. Now, I do have a spice mix that I'm going to add, which is an Italian herb mix that we're just going to add because it makes it so much easier. Of course, it has parsley, oregano, basil, and I think sage perhaps. So we're going to go ahead and sort of give that a little bit of an add here. Oh dear, the smoke is sort of, there we go. So adding that, I think there's a little bit of garlic powder as well. Of course, you can just add real garlic and it tastes much better, but this is just so much faster if you've got sort of a mix on hand. And I'm also going to go ahead and add a little bit more of the paprika. I'm going to add a little bit more of the chili powder. And I'm going to add probably some additional sort of basil and oregano. Oh, actually I have a basil and oregano mix right here, so I don't even have to get them separately. So let's just add some of that in. And you may think that perhaps I'm adding quite a lot to it, but of course with these sauces it does sort of cook down a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit of a try, and then we'll add our spinach. Alright, darling, so while we've got that all going, I'm just going to give this a bit of a taste. Nice and sweet, but it is missing one thing. A little bit more wine. Ah, yes, very good, very nice, yes, yes. Of course, the longer you cook your sauce, the less liquidy it's going to become. And I recommend that if you're trying to get rid of any moisture, that you leave it uncovered and simmering. Of course, if you want to keep that moisture in, but you sort of need to continue to reduce perhaps some of the vegetables that are in there, or if you would like to make a sweeter, more caramelized flavor, that's when you want to keep the lid on your pot or pan to keep the moisture from escaping. Of course, it becomes condensation, but it will drip back down, and you can always tilt the lid, of course, to allow that to happen as well. So we're going to go ahead now. Let me just... Perfect, perfect. Just going to go ahead and add our spinach. Now, it seems like a lot, of course. Any of the sort of leafy greens are going to reduce down by more than half. So you really want to put basically an overwhelming amount. I like to make it sort of bursting out of my pan or my pot, whatever I'm cooking with at the time. And then you can give it a little bit of a stir. I sort of like to keep it on top though, because if you cover it, which is what we're going to do now, it's going to sort of steam itself inside there. You do want to make sure there's enough room between the lid and the base, but sort of that's where we're going with all of this. Okay, now I'm going to give a bit of a stir on the spaghetti now, which is getting to be quite close to finished. And you want to make sure that your spaghetti can sort of move freely within your pot, otherwise you're going to get these clumps, which, although they can be kind of tasty, I don't really recommend it's not as good, especially if you're sort of trying to feed a lot of people. It's harder if your spaghetti has all sort of become one lump, ginormous, conglomerate pasta. So we're just going to let the spaghetti go ahead and cook a little bit, and our spinach to wilt a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll see how it's going, darlings. So we're going to go ahead and take a look now. You can see the nice bright green color on the spinach that's completely wilted, and we're just going to go ahead and sort of stir that all in together now. At this point, you can give your sauce one final taste, but you are actually finished with your sauce, and it's ready to serve whenever you are. Of course, feel free to add more wine to it, darlings. You know, I always find it helps a dinner party go over, and it sort of keeps everyone very calm to have, oh dear, that steam is terrible for the camera. It just makes everything go so much better. So I do recommend that whichever wine you are planning on drinking, whatever wine you want to drink with the meal, is the one that you end up, of course, using in your sauce, because you want the flavors to be complementary, of course. And although a lot of people say to use a sort of cheap wine to cook with, I find that's actually not the case at all. And the better quality the wine you use, of course, the better your food is going to taste. So, particularly if you're someone that is single, or maybe you're a couple and you don't like to drink a lot of wine, find you can finish up bottles very quickly by using it, of course, in your cooking. That stubborn little bastard. Come here. I'm going to crush him. There we go, you heard it pop. There we go. Everything in its place. I'm reducing now to the very lowest it can go without actually the gas going out. And then if you want, you can actually just turn it off and leave it covered, which is probably a better idea. Our spaghetti now is ready. You want it to be a little bit al dente, and of course you can test that by throwing it on the wall. That sounds absolutely ridiculous, but it does work. If it sticks, it's done. If not, then back into the pot it goes. Or you can just taste it. It should be just a little bit firmer than what you want, because of course it's going to cook even while you're letting it drain. The heat is going to continue to cook it. If you're worried about it, after you drain it, you can just throw it into your spaghetti sauce and just mix it together. The pasta will absorb the flavor of your sauce a little bit if you have extra time. But we're just going to go ahead now and just strain this. There we go. And then if you are making it a little early, if you're not going to be adding it into your sauce, what I recommend is that you put it back into the pot that was hot, just to keep it warm, and give it a few tablespoons worth of olive oil and give it a bit of a toss. It will stick a little bit, but not as much as it will otherwise. And I do recommend that while it's in sort of the strainer, you give it a little bit also of a stir. I use chopsticks just because I find it a little bit easier to sort of get in there. And then, of course, the steam is very good for your skin, so it's a bit of a facial, isn't it, darling? So it's absolutely wonderful. Cooking is good for your skin. Did you know that, darling? So, let's make sure that all the water is out. Okay, and then we're going to pour it back into our little pot here. And I'm going to give it a little bit of a bath with the olive oil. Liberal dosing is best. Okay. Now at this point, basically, darlings, the meal is ready to be served. So we're going to go ahead and serve up a bowl for you to have a look at. There you go, darlings. You have your spaghetti with red sauce all ready to serve with a nice glass of wine. Alright, darlings, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Cooking with Thranduil. I don't know if we'll make this sort of a regular thing or not. That's sort of up to you all. If you want to see more cooking, and I know that I did sort of a very basic thing here, but I thought we'd just start with easy things that you can do, especially if you have kids. I would say this probably serves 4 to 6, depending, of course, on portion sizes. But it does keep very well, so go ahead and send me any more requests related to cooking or otherwise, and I'm happy to answer them, darling. So have a good evening. Ta-ta.